Hi guys, today we're diving deep in Python, breaking down those three concepts that confuse most people and making them crystal clear. So we'll cover beginner, intermediate, and advanced Python cheat sheets all in one place. So whether you are just starting out or aiming for expert level mastery, this video is your shortcut to understanding Python the right way. We are starting right away with the beginner level Python cheat sheet. So we'll mainly focus on data structures to start with. And other data structures we are going to start with lists. And remember, lists are mutable, ordered collections. So we can have an example of a list with 1, 2, and 3. And you can have a list method like appending which adds a number to it. List.remove, so like removing 2, which will remove 2. Remember, I forgot to add 4, so I think it will help me. And for example, if you want to get the first number by slicing, as well you can get the last number, and this is how we get the last number, and you get it at 4. And you can also slice the some part like 1 colon 3. And now we can move to tuples, which also add different kind of data structure, and tuples are immutable sequences. You can have an example of tuple 1, 2, 3, and value of a tuple, for example, at position 0 will be 1, and expected output will be 1, as I have said. Moving ahead, you can look at dictionaries, and dictionary, remember, are simply key value pairs or key value storage if you wish so. And you can have a dictionary with a name, as for example, Harry, age is 25. Remember, I'm not 25, that's an example. And if you want to extract the name, just say d and name, and then we'll give you the name Harry. D.get is also another method. You can get an age, which is 25, and the city, for example, I'm in New York. That's an example, but I'm not in New York currently. And the new dictionary will be name Harry, age 25, and city New York. And you can also look at sets. Sets are unordered unique elements, which means we do not have duplicates in sets. And you can have an example of set 1, 2, 3, and remember set starts with curly braces, and so if we say set.add 4, we will get this, and set.remove 2, we also get this one, 2 has been removed. We can also look at some conditionals. Remember, you can do more on data structures. We have just given you a tip of an iceberg. So conditionally, we're going to look at if, elif, and else. So for example, x is equal to 1, and if x is greater than 0, then we need to print positive. Elsewhere, or elif, we need to print, for example, negative. And remember, the output will be positive because x is greater than 0, and if it's equivalent to 0, then we have it printed as 0. And you have now idea why it's printing positive. I know you must test the code, please. I'm just showing you as an example. So we can look at loops, and we are going to focus on for and while loops. So for example, for I in range 5, we need to print I. So it will give you the output as 0, 1, 3, and 4. And x is equal to 1, for example. You can look at while loop. While x less than 4, we need to print x, and we need to also increment x by 1 to avoid infinite loops. So the expected output should be 1, 2, and 3. And so we can also look at functions briefly. And remember, functions are simply reusable code blocks, and functions are created using def keyword. For example, we want to create a function that will add two numbers a and b, and we want to return the result. So the result will be the, for example, add, and pass on the arguments 2 and 3, and output should be 5. So the result is equal to be 5. So you can run from your side and confirm. And remember, you can use the code editor of your choice. I'm using a notebook, just for teaching purpose, but you can use VS Code, you can use other. So you can look at classes as well. So remember, classes are simply object blueprints. So they're used to create the real world object, like a car, like a person, and similar. So just have a class person as an example. We want to define a method that will contain self and name parameters. And so self.name should be name, and we want to define another method called greet self with self parameter, and now we want to return hello comma plus self.name. So we want to create an instance of a person class, and this person we are going to give the name Grace. So if we print person.greet, it will give you the spit out plus hello comma Grace. And with that, let us look at list comprehensions. Remember, list comprehension is just a way to compact our list creation. And you can have an example of squares. For example, x squared for x in range 5. And this means you give us the squares of 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, 6, as you can see. So, and you can also have events from a range of values. For example, this one will give us the even numbers only. We can move to file handling. So with open file.txt as read mode, in write mode as f. So f.write hello. So we are writing hello to our file called file.txt, and with open file.txt we want to read it now, which means read mode, and we want to give it an assign it to an object called data. So f.read will get an output as hello. So data will be now assigned to hello. So guys, let us look briefly at exception handling. Exception handling has 3 sections. We have try, we have except, and we have finally block. We want to try, for example, x is equal to 10 over 0, and we want to except printing 0 division error. We will print error instead of 0 division error, and finally we will print, for example, done. So the output should be done. We will have 2 outputs of error and done. And let us move straight away to Python intermediate level. So we're going to start away looking at comprehensions. And for example, we want squares of even numbers will be x squared for x in range 10 if x percentage 2 is equal to 0, which means there's no remainder. So the result will be 0, 4, 16, 36, and 64. You can also use mapping. So for example, x colon x squared for x in range 4. So this is what you should get, like 0 to 0, 1 to 1, 2 to 4, as well as 3 to 9. And you can also get the unique values from characters, for example, car or car in CCP. So this is what you should get. And you can look at lambda function. So remember, lambda function is simply a one-line function, sometimes called anonymous function. And we can have an example in the following section. So for example, add, we want a lambda function to add 2 numbers a and b, and you can also sort a list in reverse order using lambda keyword, lambda function, by the way it is, and the list should be sorted in reverse order. So we can also look at generators. So remember, generators simply lazy iterators, and you can have an example, for example, countdown function with n, and while n is greater than 0, we need to yield n. So yielding is like returning. So when we want to n will be we will be incrementing it downwards or decrementing, in other words. So for I in countdown, for example 3, we want to print I. The output will be 3, 2, and 1. And you can also have a generator, for example, of squares of x, or from values 0 to 4. If you print next gen will be 0, will be 1, 1 squared is 1, and gen of next will be 4, 2 squared is 4, etc. And you can look at decorators. Decorators simply are used to wrap functions. And you can have an example, for example, def log function, def wrap with argument and some keyword arguments. and want to print, for example, calling function.function name, and you can also return the function with some arguments and some keyword arguments, and as well you can also return the wrapper. And now you can also have another method called @log. We want to define greet function. I want to print hello, and if called the greet function, the expected output will be calling greet and hello. That's the output. So we want to create a decorator with some arguments. For example, we want to define repeat n, and we want to define another function called decorator with some function as parameter, and also define a wrapper with some arguments as parameters. So for underscore in range n, so this is what we are expecting, a function with some argument, and we want also to return a wrapper we had defined earlier. As well, we want to return the decorator. So at repeat 3, and if I, for example, define hi. If we say hi, then we'll have to print hi 3 times to output hi 3 times. Hi. Let us look at context managers. We can have an example, for example, class timer. So we aim to calculate the time used to do something. So we want to define the entry time with some parameters as self. And for example, we want to import a time, and self dot start will be equal to time dot time, and the return will be, we want to return the self parameter, and we want to define the exit function with self and argument as the parameters. So we import time, and in practice we want to print the lapse time. It will be the time dot time, which is the end time minus the start time. So with timer, we want to sum the range of this. So this will compute the sum of the numbers between 0 and 9999, and the expected output should be something less than seconds, so, or some few seconds. So we want to look at advanced parameters. So for example, you can have this function with a, b, asterisk and c parameters, which will only take keywords arguments. So we want to return a plus b plus c, and it will give us an error if we try that. For example, function 1 2 3 give us an error, but if we specify the value of c, then it will give us the result. So asterisk means that anything after asterisk you must specify. And positional as well, you can also use a function as a positional. And so if we take function 2, like 1 is equal to 2, b is equal to 2, it will give us an error. So it will simply indicate that you want to provide values explicitly, except for positional. So unpacking follows our next topic. For example, a asterisk mid and exector. So a will be 1, z will be 5, and mid will take the remaining part of the list. And also have a dictionary of a to 1, b to 2, and also merge asterisk d, and c will be 3. So if we print the merged one, the additional will be a will be 1, b 2, and c 3. And we can also have look at enumeration function. Like we can create it using from enum. We need to import enum, and class cal, for example, new. So red will be 1 and the green will be 2. If so, cal dot red, it will give us the red color, which is 1. And we want to look at some type hints as we are about to wrap up this section. So from typing, we need to import list, optional, etc. And we can define the total, which will be take nums list, which will be int, as well as want to return the sum of nums, and want to define a foo. X will be an optional string, and it will be an empty by default. We want to print x and exector. So with that, we're moving on to advanced Python cheat sheets. Now in this section we are going to focus on Metaclasses as our first subtopic. And remember, Metaclasses simply modify the class creation. So the advanced guys, I know you understand this, so it's just a way of reminder. So just a simple notes, Metaclasses are one of the Python's most powerful and again most misunderstood features. So, and they are actually are used to control how classes themselves are created. And you can have an example, for example, class meta with an parameter of type, and you can also define a new method with class name, basis, and attribute. So attribute will take a tag attribute as auto added. So we want to return super new class with name, basis, and attributes. So and a new class called A will inherit the parent class, which is meta. So and we can also pass. So if you print a dot tag, we will get auto added because it has inherited from the meta class, which is the parent class. And look at descriptors, which simply control the attribute access. So we can define a class, for example, class descriptor, and we define get method with self and object type. By default we're going to give it as none, and we want to return object with value, or simply value of the object. And you can also have a new method called set with self and object and also its value, and the object value will be equivalent to value. And you can also have a class called foo with x being given or assigned to a descriptor function. Now foo is equal to foo and x, so f dot x will be 10. So find out why we are getting 10. So guys, we are looking at threads or and processes, sometimes summarized as concurrency, and we just need to understand what are they in a nutshell. So concurrency in Python can mean running multiple tasks, so they appear to execute at the same time. And remember, concurrency also improves the performance when dealing with input and output bound tasks. That's tasks that wait on network disks, APIs, and sometimes CPU bound tasks using multiple processes. So our example, for example, from concurrent.futures, we need to import thread pool executor, and with thread pool executor as e, the result will be list example.map using this lambda function, and we need to get this as the final output, 0 all the way to 16. Remember, it's simply a lambda function that giving us some square values. And we can look at asyncio, sometimes called asyncio tasks. So asyncio is a Python's built-in framework for asynchronous single-threaded high concurrency programs, and it lets you, or it lets any or whoever the programmer is, run thousands of tasks at once without using many threads or processes. And we can have an example in both asyncio. So asyncio define worker, and you can have await asyncio.sleep, and you can return I. So asyncio define main, and tasks will be, for example, asyncio.create task worker, and for I invent 3. So we want to return await asyncio dot gather task. So this asyncio dot run end, and the expected output should be 1 second delay, which will be 1, 2, and 3. So there you can look at we can look at iterator protocol, which simply refers to custom iterator, and you can look at a single example. So a class countdown, so which will entail counting down, and you can define a method with init function, init method, sorry, self with n parameter, and self with n will be n. I can define iter method with self parameter, and you can return now self. You can also define the next method with self parameter. And so if self.n is less than or equal to 0, then you need to raise stop iteration. And self.n we want to decrease by 1. Now we want to return self.n. And for I in countdown 3, so it will be 3, 2, and 1. If we count down, sorry, 2, 1, and 0. And because Python indexing starts from 0. And you can look at data classes. And data classes are simply Python features that was introduced in Python 3.7, and it makes it easy to create classes meant for storing data without writing a lot of boilerplates. So we can think of them as lightweight classes with auto-generated methods. So we can have an example from data classes. We want to import data class. So at data class false is equal to true. So class vector is such that x is an int, y is also an int. So at data class class range is such that start is an integer, also end should also be an integer. So and want to define a method of post int with self parameters. So and want to assert that self.start will be less than or equal to self.end, and the expected output should be something like, if we get the range of 1 to 5, it will work, but if we get the reverse 5 and 1, it will raise an assertion error.